This crazy person at middleweight in the top 7 or 8. It's Sean Strickland.
All right, we got UFC Vegas 76 at the Apex again. Got some good fights, and it is the return of Kevin Lee in the featured prelim fight. He is taking on a Russian guy named Rinat Fakhretdinov. I probably butchered that name, but this guy Rinat, I'm gonna call him by his first name just for my own sake. He's on a 19-fight win streak. The dude is 20-1. So Kevin Lee's get thrown right back into the fire. It's going to be at welterweight. He won his UFC debut. I think he has 2 fights in the UFC. Rinat does, and he is a minus 205 favorite. Kevin Lee is a plus 175 underdog. Lee is only 2-3 in his last 5. That includes losses to friend of the channel D-Rod and Oliveira and RDA. So Lee has had a rough go of it, and he's getting thrown right back into the fire. But this is his chance. So what do you make of this fight?
Yeah, if you know me at Inside Fighting, I don't love your chances if you're going up against a guy with a last name that I cannot pronounce. Who's most likely from Russia. Is he Russian?
He's Russian, yep.
I don't love this matchup for Kevin Lee, and I kind of feel like a little bad for him that he comes back to the UFC, gets re-signed, and this is how you're thrown in. You're thrown up against a Russian grappler. It just feels like a bad place to be. Kevin Lee's obviously very solid. He's got incredible knockout power, knockout skills. I think he's going to feel like his body's going to feel better at welterweight. I talked to him a little bit about it. I interviewed him a few months back on 5 Minutes for Fighting, and he talked just about how the weight cuts were really affecting him, and he just didn't feel good. So I do think that there's something to that. He's going to feel good. I think there is potential for high value underdog here with those odds. So I wouldn't mind a little sprinkle on Kevin Lee, but if I'm just being honest, I don't think it would be wise to put too much money down on him. I think it's too much of a risk, and I think most likely he's going to be losing this fight.
Yeah, I was leaning towards what you were saying about Kevin Lee being a high-value underdog just because, Kevin Lee was talking about this during the press conference, the media day scrum. He was like, this guy is on an incredible streak, but he's never fought at this level. He's never fought a guy at this level before, I listed off the names that Kevin Lee has lost to, and those are some pretty good guys. I mean, you got 2 former champions. You've got Daniel Rodriguez, who's very good. So, Rinat hasn't fought in the craziest promotions. He wasn't in, I'm not thinking of KSW. I forget. I think it's ACW, the big Russian organization. He doesn't fight for them. He didn't fight for them. So he wasn't seeing necessarily the best competition out there in that part of the world. So I could see how Kevin Lee might be a high value underdog, but you're right. This is not a fight to put a lot of money on. You got to go with the Russian. He's a 205 favorite. I think we're looking at a unanimous decision for the Russian, probably.
Right. Agreed.
All right, moving on. The next fight I want to talk about is we've got this undefeated prospect from Ecuador, Michael Morales. This kid is 23 years old, but he has so much talent. They really think he might be one of the next big things at welterweight. I think they're trying to build him up a little bit. Max Griffin is a good test for him, a UFC vet who's 37 years old. So there is a big age difference, more than a decade, right? So Morales is undefeated, obviously. He's got 2 TKO victories in the UFC. And Griffin is on a pretty good run himself. He's 4-1 in his last 5. His only loss was against Neil Magny, and that was a split decision. So at least one judge thought he won.
Right.
So this will be a good test for Morales. I'm really excited about this. Morales is a minus 250 favorite. So he's a very heavy favorite against the plus 210 underdog of Max Griffin. What do you make of this fight?
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the Magny fight because before, I'm not all that read up on Griffin's career. But I went and I watched the Magny fight a little bit. I kind of feel like Griffin got a little bit screwed in that decision. And I feel like it was tough. It was a tough call. You could see how disappointed he was.
Yeah.
That being said, if you're 37 years old and you're struggling against another journeyman guy like Neil Magny, no disrespect to Neil Magny. I think he's an awesome fighter, but he's just, he's a guy that's like a gatekeeper of the division a little bit, right?
Yeah.
That's what, what's his name? Conor McGregor's protege said, Ian Gary said about him. Um, I think this is a bet the house situation on Morales. This is a stepping stone fight for him to sort of jump up into higher level competition. I think that it's a clear win. He's my lock of the week, and I would, I wouldn't obviously risk a ton of money because you're not getting a lot in return, but it's betting the house. I mean, like, bet whatever amount you are okay with losing, bet Adam Morales to win. That's what I would
That's
say.
a good way. That's a good way of putting it. I really
Yeah.
like Morales' fight. He's a heavy favorite for a reason. The kid has talent through the roof. This is a very good stepping stone fight for him. I think that's a good way to see it. If you want to take a risk on Max Griffin plus 210, I mean, he's a guy who's 4-1 in his last five. He's older. He's at the end of his ropes. You mentioned a little bit of this about Emmett in last week's episode. It's like a guy that old at the end of his wits. You don't want to count a guy like that out just because he understands that the end is in sight, right?
Yeah.
Michael Morales loses this fight. He's 23 years old. He's got a bright future ahead of him still. Max Griffin loses this fight that, he might retire after for all we know. In the main event, we actually have the closest odds of the fights that we talked about. Sean Strickland is a minus 155 favorite, and Abus Magomedov is a plus 135 underdog. Strickland is 3-2 in his last five. Magomedov is 4-1 in his last five. Strickland had those losses against Jared Cannonier and Alex Pereira. So obviously those are two guys at the very top of middleweight. Pereira is not a middleweight anymore, but he was the champion. Yeah, this is a very interesting fight. This is, for me, this is a bit of a coin flip. But what do you make of this fight?
Yeah. I mean, this is one of those things where it's like, you have to be a crazy person to be in the top 7 or 8 of middleweight and accept this fight. And who's the biggest crazy person at middleweight in the top 7 or 8? It's Sean Strickland. So it makes sense that you would take this fight. The guy's a true goon, and he's just kind of down to fight anybody. It's crazy because all my logic is telling me to pick Abu because he seems like, I mean, his knockout he had in his UFC debut, if you haven't seen it, it's spectacular. I forget who it was, but it was a front kick to the face. His toe gets lodged into the top of the dude's mouth. It goes into the guy's mouth when he kicks him, front kicks him to the face, and then ends up ground and pounding him. Strickland's last few fights, obviously he got knocked out by Pereira. I thought he actually beat Cannonier, and he thought he beat Cannonier too. That was a very close call, very close fight. Put on a really good performance against Imavov, but none of those fights went to the ground. And I don't know what the grappling is for Abu. I have concerns for Strickland if this fight does go to the ground. But you know what? I'm going to go with Strickland. I think that if you're crazy enough to take the fight, you're crazy enough to win the fight. And I just genuinely think that, like, even though Strickland said some pretty, like, atrocious and disgusting things at his media day this week, I still think he's kind of trolling. I still think he's a good fighter. I think that if he can find a way to turn the fight into a sparring match, which he tends to do, it favors Strickland heavily. And I think you're getting pretty decent odds considering I think most people are predicting Abus to win the fight. I'll go out on a limb. I'll say Strickland gets it done. Decision.
Nice. Yeah, I think that's a pretty good bet. I mean, he is the favorite for a reason, minus 155, not a super heavy favorite, but if he wins, it is probably by decision. I just like Magomedov in this fight. I feel like he's going to get it done. He is known more for his striking, but he does have some good grappling. He definitely has more power, I think, than Strickland does. Strickland's not a guy who puts everything behind his punches because he does turn things into a sparring match, right?
Yeah.
He wants to touch you up. He wants to touch you, put put hands on you, but he's not necessarily putting everything behind those punches. I think Abus has more of a chance to get a knockout in that sense. So, I'm going to go Abus by knockout, and I think it's going to happen late in the fight, maybe the fourth round.
All right, that makes
sense. I think Strickland's going to get comfortable. He's going to get in a rhythm, and then Magomedov's going to send him back to the kitchen with a big right hand, something like that.
Yeah, and it depends on how much he's actually learned from his little kickboxing camp that he did with Alex Pereira up in Connecticut. He went and visited with Potan and Glover, so who knows what he's learned from that trip.
Yeah.
Maybe he's picked up a few things here and there, but you know how I feel about guys whose last name are Magomedov. But I still think Strickland finds a way. He's just crazy enough to get it done against a scary Russian or whatever he is. So I'll take it.